The following program is paid for by the friends and partners of Touching Lives.
Yeah, the cost of courage is great, but the cost of cowardliness is greater. The cost of compromise is greater. So I'm asking you who are parents, and I'm asking you who are grandparents, teach your kids and your grandkids and model for them a life that shows up when the rest of the world is hiding, and speaks up when the rest of the world, or stands up when the rest of the world is sitting, and speaks up when the rest of the world is listening. Go big and go bold. That's what Jesus did for us. That's what we ought to do for Him.
Teaching people everywhere who Jesus is and why they need Him. This is Touching Lives with James Merritt.
Now, the story takes place in a place called Persia. It was a kingdom. What had happened was Israel had been taken into captivity by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians had been conquered by the Persians. So now they're under the authority of a Persian king called Xerxes. He ruled over what's now known as the Medo-Persian Empire. You don't need to remember all this, but I will tell you how big this empire was. Back in the day, if you can imagine, it stretched from modern-day Libya in Africa all the way to the other side of Pakistan. It had over 50 million people. And up to that point, it was the largest empire in the history of the world, and they ruled the Middle East for about 200 years. Well, Esther enters into this historical thriller, and she kind of turns it into a Cinderella story, because here's how she starts out. When the story begins, Esther's just an unknown Hebrew girl, just a country girl, a Jewish girl. Then in this miraculous turn of events, again, God's got His hand all over it, Esther is entered into a beauty contest. The king is looking for a new wife. 25,000 women are entered into the contest, and out of 25,000 women, Esther wins the prize. She marries the most powerful man on earth. She becomes the queen of Persia. But what she's going to find out is God did not put her in the kingdom just to be a queen. Not a queen for a day, not even a queen for a year. He put her there to save the Jewish people. Here's what happened. She had a cousin. The cousin's name was Mordecai. Now, Mordecai had basically adopted and raised her because evidently when she was a young child, both of her parents had died. So Mordecai raises her and he adopts her. He's actually the one that enters her into this contest, never dreaming she would win. Well, the moment she wins, he realized, okay, we've got a problem. So he goes to Esther and he says, Esther, don't tell anybody you're Jewish. The kingdom will go into apoplexy if they know that of all the women the king could have married, he marries this Jewish peasant who, by the way, they considered the Jews to be just nothing more than captured immigrants, which is really what they were. Well, then a villain by the name of Haman enters the scene. Haman is the prime minister of the empire, second in command only to the king. Haman has a big ego. And when the king makes Haman the prime minister, he passes a law. He says, everywhere I go, whenever you see me, you don't salute me, you don't wave hello, you don't clap, you've got to bow down before me. But Mordecai refuses. And he refuses because he's a Jew. And he's not going to bow down to anyone except the king, and he'll only bow down to the king because he knows God is behind the king. But he is not about to bow down to Mordecai. To Haman. Well, that infuriates Haman, and when he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, his temper goes through the roof. Let me tell you why. This story really is it's an incredible story. Mordecai is a Jew. Haman is an Amalekite. Now you say, well, why is that such a big deal? Well, Jews and Amalekites had been in a blood feud that had been going on for over 1,000 years. So, in other words, they were kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys. They were kind of like Alexander Hamilton or Aaron Burr. And for you young people, they were kind of like Kanye West and Taylor Swift, okay? They don't like each other. They hate each other. They are not getting along. You get the picture. So when Haman finds out that Mordecai not only won't bow down to him, but now he finds out he is a Jew, he is really hot, and he says, you know what, Mordecai? I'm not just going to take you out. I'm going to take your people out. So he goes to the king and he convinces the king that the Jews are dangerous and they need to be wiped out. Because he doesn't just hate the person of Mordecai, now he hates the people of Mordecai. So this is where the story really picks up. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged, just putting it mildly. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, Jews, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In other words, he said, you've really gone and done it now. I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to wipe your wife out. I'm going to wipe your children out. I'm going to hunt down every Jew in this kingdom. I'm going to wipe out the nation of Israel once and for all. Now, to many of us that know our history, sounds familiar, because there was another dictator about, 90, 100 years ago, almost, 75 years ago, that said, you know what? I think I've come up with a final solution. His name was Hitler. And he thought he was going to do the same thing about 2,400 years later. So Haman has now manipulated the signing of the death warrant of an entire nation. We're talking genocide on an unprecedented scale. So you can imagine what Haman is feeling right now. And he realizes something. There's only one thing now standing between the annihilation of the Jewish nation and life. And it's that little Jewish peasant girl who is now called Queen Esther. She is the ace in the hole. She is the only person in the whole world that can change the mind of the king and turn the tide from tragedy to triumph. To do this, she'll have to go big and she'll have to go bold. And so we're going to read about this Wonder Woman right now, and she shows us what courage is all about. And by the way, can I just say this before this is not even my notes. I don't say this before I forget it. This is so important. If you are a follower of Jesus, a true follower, you don't just say you're a follower, you're the real deal. I want to warn you of something. If you decide you're going to be a courageous Christian, it will cost you more in the future than it's ever cost you. You will not stay in a comfort zone in this culture and be a committed Christian. You will not be popular with everybody you work with if you're going to be a committed Christian. All people will not speak well of you if in this culture you're going to be a courageously committed Christian. And here's what courage does. 3 simple things. Number 1, courage shows up. Courage shows up. Now, when news gets back to Mordecai about the edict that's been issued, he collapses in a heap of sackcloth and ashes. He's sitting outside the city gate. He's wailing, he's mourning, he's crying, he's tearing his clothes. Well, Esther hears about this commotion going on. She doesn't know what's wrong with her cousin, so she sends some attendants to find out what the problem is, because she obviously didn't know anything about this plan at all. She hadn't heard anything. Well, Mordecai realizes, again, Esther's his ace in the hole, so he sends word back to her about what's happened, and then he tells her, Esther, you've got to rescue us. You've got to go on your white horse and come to the rescue. You've got to go into the king's presence. You've got to beg for mercy. You're our only hope. You've got to go and show him how wrong this is. You're our only chance to spare your people and my people. Well, that sounds like a reasonable request, right? But it's not that easy, and here's why. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Let me tell you, ladies, what's going on here. They don't know what women's lib is. There's no such thing as gender equality. Even the queen couldn't just kind of stroll into the office of the king and just sit down and have a chat. It didn't work that way. Back in the day, nobody had an open door to the king, nobody. Not the queen, not the prime minister, not the Secretary of State, nobody. You say, well, why not? Because there was always this great fear of assassination. And so the king had kind of surrounded himself with what our version would be of the Secret Service. So if you wanted to see the king, here's what you had to do. You would send a formal request in writing, why you wanted to see the king, what your business was. Then he had to respond with a formal invitation. Then when you went into his presence, he had to hold out his golden scepter to show his approval. Now, if he held out the golden scepter, you were good to go. You could say whatever was on your mind. However, if you walked into the king's presence and he didn't hold out that golden scepter, you weren't walking out. Well, when Mordecai hears her response, he realizes she's in this tension. He realizes she's in the valley of decision. He realizes the decision that she's having to make. If this were a movie right now, this would be the part of the movie where you'd be biting your nails, you'd be on the edge of your seat, your eyes would be dilated, your ears would be perked up, you'd be wondering with each other, man, what is she going to do? Is she going to come through or not? Is she going to do the right thing? Is she going to do the easy thing? What in the world is she going to do? And then Mordecai, realizing what she's facing, makes one of the most life-changing statements in all the Bible. He says to her, he says to the attendant, I want you to go back and tell Esther this. Listen to what he says. He sent back this answer. Do not think because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you've remained silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. You listen to your pastor today. More than ever since I've been alive, you're going to face time after time after time after time at times that you least expect it. You're going to do the right thing or not. You're going to stand up, you're going to whip out. Even if it means standing alone. And let me just go ahead and give you the dirty little secret here. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. It costs to be courageous. And courage never goes on sale. Courage never comes at half price. Courage never comes at a discount. There's no blue light special on courage. And you're going to have times in your life where you're going to have to face risk and fear. It's going to stare you right in the face. That's why I don't believe it's a coincidence that 365 times in the Bible you find two words. You know what those words are? Fear not. Fear not. Fear not. 365 times, once for every day of the year. Fear not. You know why? Because God knows every day there's a chance for fear to make us crawl under the bed, hide in the closet, retreat from the battle, go along to get along. That's why the first step of courage, just showing up. Author Brene Brown put it this way. This is a great thought. She said, sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just to have the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. See, there are going to be times in your life, and this is the way it's going to work. There are going to be times in your life when you've got to decide, and you've got to decide quick, what really is first in my life? Who really is most important in my life? You got to decide, and you got to decide on the spot, am I going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? Am I going to do my thing or God's thing? Am I going to be courageous? Am I going to be a coward? Am I going to show up? Am I going to wimp out? I read this recently and I loved it. Listen to this. A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. I love that. A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. The ship of your life should sail the seas it was meant to travel. You can't stay in the harbor. If you're going to be a person of character, therefore a person of courage, you've got to courageously ship out and show up. That's step number one. Courage shows up. Step number two, courage stands up. Courage stands up. See, one of the reasons why courage is such a difficult thing to have at certain times You know why? Because most of the time when you have to show courage, you don't have time to think about it. You don't plan. You don't get up and say, okay, at 2 o'clock today, I'll be courageous. Or at 5 o'clock today, I'll show a little courage. No, here's why courage is so difficult. Because most of the time, you don't have time to think about doing the courageous thing, saying the courageous word, taking the courageous action. It just comes like a lightning bolt out of the blue. And then you find out, do you have it or do you don't? That's where politicians buckle and they fold like accordions. So are you pro-life and they wimp out? Do you believe marriage should only be between a man and a woman? And they wimp out. See it all the time because you don't have time to think about it. And unfortunately, it's at that moment you find out, do I bleed red or do I bleed yellow? Do I really have the courage that God would want me to have or do I not? Well, in this case, Esther didn't take long to decide. Look what she does. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. See, we all have those such a time as this moments when we on the spot, got to make a decision. Am I going to keep my seat? Am I going to stand up? And I got to go with the crowd, go with the flow, do what the Romans do the right thing, and if I've got to do it alone, stand up even if I have to stand up alone, take the right path even if I take it alone, take it alone. Because at that moment, listen to me, at that moment, courage will not be asking you this question, what's the easy thing to do? Courage will not be asking you this question, what is the most popular thing to do? Courage will be asking you this question, what is the right thing to do? And Esther knows there's only one thing she can do. Now she understands. Now I know why I won the beauty contest. Now I know why I'm sitting in this palace. Now I know why I'm the only woman in the whole country that has the title queen. I get it. You put me here, God, for such a time as this. And when those moments come, here's what will happen. It happens every time. Fear will scream in your ear, stay seated. Fear will scream in your ear, say nothing. Fear will scream in your ear, don't do anything. Courage will just quietly speak to your heart. You have come to this place for such a time as this. This is your moment. God is looking at you. God is counting on you. This is your time to stand up for what you know is right and to say the right thing. And she realizes the cost of her decision with these unbelievably courageous words. Listen to what she says. And if I perish, I perish. That's the kind of courage you got to have in today's world. If I lose my job, I lose my job. If I don't get reelected, I don't get reelected. If the mainstream media rips me to shreds, they rip me to shreds. If I'm called a bigot, if I'm called intolerant, if I'm called just a right-wing fundamentalist Christian, that just goes with the territory. Someone has said that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the mastery of it. And see, the Bible adds a very important element to courage, and that is trust in God. Because I haven't even told you what courage is. Now let me tell you what courage is. You ready? This is my definition. Courage is being willing to do what you know God wants you to do, even when the consequences are unseen and unknown. Now, full disclosure, the cowardly way will always be the easy way. Always. The courageous way will always be the hard way. The cowardly way will always be the comfortable way. The courageous way will always be the costly way. But to quote Brene Brown one more time, she said, I want to be in the arena. I want to be brave with my life. When we make the choice to dare greatly, we sign up to get our tails kicked. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. So Queen Esther has made her decision. Okay, if I perish, I perish. And then you realize that between chapter 4 and chapter 5, there's a pause in the action for 3 days. The Jews are praying. The Jews are fasting. The Jews are interceding for Esther. The Jews are asking God to give Esther strength, and Esther is looking to God. And then we read these words in chapter 5. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. Now notice, she's not standing in the outer court where the king can't see her. She's not going, man, do I really want to do this? Golly, Pete, oh man. She says, no, I'm going right into the inner court. Now just imagine, get this picture. I'm walking into the inner court, and I don't know if I'm going to live or die. As a matter of fact, there's probably a greater than 50-50 chance that I'll die. Because if you know the whole story, I didn't even tell you this part. The reason why she got to marry the king is because the king kicked out his other wife because she wouldn't do what he told her to do. So it's not really looking too good for Queen Esther. So she doesn't know, will the king hold out the scepter or not? But you know what? At that point, she says, you know, I'm not worried about that. Because here's what I know now. It's all in God's hands. My life is in God's hands. I'm not worried about the king anymore. But Esther teaches us courage is willing to pay the price for doing the right thing. Courage is willing to go where you know you need to go and taking your stand where you need to take your stand. So what does courage do? Number one, it shows up. Number two, it stands up. Number three, it speaks up. It speaks up. So let's fast forward, okay? She's got this brilliant plan. She says to the king, can we throw a banquet? I've got this idea. I'd like to just throw a banquet. And I'd like to invite Haman. I'd like to invite all the dignitaries to come to this banquet. Well, every king loves a party. He said, sure, Esther, I'd be glad to do that. And in fact, Haman even gets this idea. They're throwing the banquet in his honor. He can't wait for the banquet. So right in front of everybody's gathered together now in this great banquet hall, right? Everybody's looking at Queen Esther, and Esther gets up, and she makes this breathtaking announcement. Watch this. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the 2nd day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? She hadn't told him yet what she wanted. What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. Now watch this. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we'd merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Now you're in that banquet hall. Man, when she says that, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, gas went up all over the room. Whispers. The queen's Jewish. Her family's Jewish. She has Jewish blood. The king is married to a Jew. And the only one that could speak up, spoke up. And the rest, as they say, is history. Because here's the problem. Since the decree had been ordered by Xerxes, it could not be revoked. That was called the law of the Medes and the Persians. So what Xerxes does is he issues another decree. He gives the Jews the right to gather together, arm themselves, and defend their lives. And the fight ensues, and the Jews killed over 75,000 Persians, and in the process saved an entire nation. All because of one woman who was willing to go big and go bold. I told you the cost of courage is great, and I'm not going to lie to you. Courage doesn't come cheap. But I'll tell you what I've learned in my life, because there have been times I've been the coward. I'm not going to stand up and tell you I've got a perfect record. I don't. But I'll tell you what I have learned. Yeah, the cost of courage is great, but the cost of cowardliness is greater. The cost of compromise is greater. So I'm asking you who are parents, and I'm asking you who are grandparents, teach your kids and your grandkids and model for them a life that shows up when the rest of the world is hiding, and speaks up when the rest of the world, or stands up when the rest of the world is sitting, and speaks up when the rest of the world is listening. Go big and go bold. That's what Jesus did for us. That's what we ought to do for Him.
To watch an extended version of today's teaching message with Dr. James Merritt, go to touchinglives.org.
Years ago, there was a great tennis player named Andre Agassi, and he did these commercials for a camera company. They had the line, "Image is everything." My generation bought into that. Our generation still buys into that. It's image that counts. I beg to differ. Reputation is what other people think you are. Character is what you and God know that you are. Your character is far more important than your reputation. Your character is far more important than any image that you portray. That's why I've written this book, Character Still Counts, because it does. As a matter of fact, it counts more than anything else in life. One of these days, you'll be dead, I'll be dead, we will be gone, and our reputation really won't matter. But the only true legacy that we'll leave behind is our character. So I want to invite you to buy a copy of this book today. Go to touchinglives.org and get your copy. And don't just read it. Use it to invest your life into the lives of those that you love, the people that mean the most to you. And live every day with this message that people can see, hear, touch, and feel. Yes, my character still counts.
Touching Lives, teaching people everywhere who Jesus is and why they need Him. This program is sponsored by Touching Lives Ministries and is made possible by the grace of God and your faithful prayers and gifts.